here at Google, and I'm delighted to be with you today and talk to you about how leading from strength, using your unique signature strengths, is the best route to sustained creativity, top performance, and fulfillment. Recent findings in business research, neuroscience, and psychology support the idea that leading from strength allows us to work with our weaknesses and is a much better strategy than focusing on weaknesses. I find that when you can lead from strength, you bring your best to the situation and you enjoy the process more. And since I also believe that joy and excellence are natural business partners, it's the way to go. It's what I use as a coach with individuals and organizations, and I'm excited about sharing some of those ideas with you today. To begin, I want to focus on how did we first get these ideas. It isn't natural to think of this. If you imagine historically in human development, we tended to focus on what's wrong rather than what's right. And in fact, there are plenty of reasons in your own past, if you just think about it. If you, in the long ago past, brought home a report card with 3 A's, 2 B's, and a C, which of those would your parents have focused on? We think it's a no-brainer, the C, right? Well, that's natural, but it turns out that's not what's best. And the big ideas behind strengths-based leadership began coming to the fore around 2000, and in the years since then have coalesced through 2 main streams of research and development. The first one comes from the Gallup organization. Yes, the same people who are bombarding you with political polls at the moment. But their Research and Education Center has spent the last 30 years interviewing top performers on all aspects of the job ladder, from the janitorial staffs to CEOs. And out of those 2 million interviews, they discerned that it would be important to find out what made them special, what made them able to use their strengths to the max in that way. So they went out and did a whole host of other interviews. They talked to 1.7 million people in 101 companies in 63 countries, and they asked a single question. And that question was, at work, do you have the chance to do what you alone do best every day? And anybody got a guess as to what percentage could answer yes to that question? Anybody? 30. 15. 5. Not quite that bad. It's actually between 30 and 15. 20% of the people in all those companies, in all those countries, said they actually get to use their strengths on a daily basis. That's 80% of the people in all that area not able to do what they do best. So out of that then, the Gallup people went back to the 2 million high performers and looked at the characteristic strengths they found among these people. What did they have in common? And they evolved an inventory of 34 strengths that they began using to test people with, to give people the chance to find out their top strengths. And you too could do that. I wanted to share with you that it's possible to take what they are now calling the Strengths Finder inventory. It's in a book called Strengths Finder 2.0. The original research came out in a book by Donald Clifton and Marcus Buckingham called Now Discover Your Strengths. That was some time ago, 2001. Now they have a new iteration, and of course they've called it Strengths Finder 2.0. The catch with this one is you have to buy the book in order to take the online inventory. There's a code embedded in the book jacket that you have to use. And the other thing about this one is that they only give you your top 5 strengths. You don't get to find out about the other 29. but it's a very useful inventory for work situations because they use business language in describing the strengths. The other inventory that I'll get to in a minute uses more general language. For instance, my top strength on this one is called strategic. And obviously, that's something good to leverage in business. My top strength in the other inventory is called curiosity and interest in the world. Similar, but slightly different. So the Gallup people define strengths this way. They say that a strength is a combination of talent plus knowledge plus skills. Strength, they say, is consistent, near-perfect performance. Well, when I hear that, I have to just kind of take the burden off my shoulders because who's near perfect all the time? But consistent, strong performance is composed of talent, which they find is genetically linked. They say it happens in that synaptic pruning that occurs in our brains the first 3 years of our lives, plus knowledge, the facts and lessons you can learn, plus the skills, the steps to learn something. Although some of the skills they've found they can't break down into steps. What would be the steps, for instance, to learn empathy? There are ways to go about it, but it's not necessarily a step-by-step process. So those 34 strengths are reflected in this inventory, and they also say that you can kind of figure out your strengths for yourself if you don't want to buy the book. Look at what you do spontaneously. Look at what you learn easily. Look at what puts you in that state of relaxation and comfort where things are just clicking for you, like Michael Jordan on the basketball court. And also look at what you long to do more of. Those would point you towards your talents, which you can develop into strengths. So that's something about the Gallup people. And there has been a whole flow of books associated with StrengthsFinder. The most recent, and I understand for Googlers, there's going to be on the website a list of the resource books I'm going to be talking about today. The most recent Gallup book by Marcus Buckingham is called Go Put Your Strengths to Work. And in it, he suggests ways to identify your own strengths separate from taking the inventory and how to use those to manage around your weaknesses. They don't say to ignore your weaknesses. They say put your strengths to work to overcome those weaknesses. So the other stream of research comes through the field of positive psychology that has been gathering steam over the last 7 or so years. When I first started researching and teaching about strengths-based leadership using positive psychology, there were maybe 100 or more references to positive psychology on Google. The last time I looked, there were 15 million. So it is a growing stream within the field of psychology. And Dr. Martin Seligman, the primary exponent of it, decided back in the early 2000s, when he was president of the American Psychological Association, to make well-being the center of his mission, his tenure as president. We know, if you go to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of mental disorders, we know in great detail what is wrong with people, but we don't necessarily know what's right with them. He wanted to create what he called a classification of the sanities, those things that help us enjoy well-being and be top performers. And so he commissioned a bunch of researchers to look at what was already out there and see what we know about what makes people strong and how those strengths play out. He found a particular formula seemed to hold. It's H equals S plus C plus V. H stands for happiness, and that then S is set range. We all have a set range of happiness we tend to come back to, no matter what happens to us. You win the lottery, you think your life is now perfect. In 6 months, you'll be about as happy as you were before you won the lottery.
You get hit by a bus leaving Google, and you lose the use of your legs. Terrible tragedy. But in about 6 months, you'll be back to the same range of happiness that you were before this happened to you. Your set range is pretty genetically conditioned. About half of your score on your set range would be accounted for by what your biological parents would have gotten. I sometimes say that and people go, oh no. But in truth, that's not all. On top of set range, there's the C, circumstances. And here you would think that some circumstances such as education, good health, living in a fortunate country would be good for us. There are only 2 that seem to have, above a subsistence level, much help. Do you think one of them would be money? Getting a little bit back and forth. It's not. Above subsistence level, money is not that much of a factor in happiness and using your strengths. The 2 that do prove out to be helpful are having a strong network of social relationships and having a system of meaning, a sense of meaning in your life, whether that translates in traditional faith perspectives or simply a philosophy that helps you get out of bed in the morning. Those are the 2 circumstantial things that help. But then there's the variables. H equals S, set range, circumstances, C, V, variables. And the variables are what the positive psychologists went after. They looked at what strengths of character allow us to make the most of what turns out to be 40% of our happiness is conditioned by those variables. We've got a lot of the piece of the pie, pretty big piece to work with. And so what they did to try and discover, are there universal or near universal variables that can help with this strengths stuff? So they commissioned a bunch of people to read in all the wisdom and philosophical traditions, everything from Confucius to the Quran to the Bible and the Samurai Code, even the Klingon warrior code. They looked at what virtues and character strengths were thought to be universal in different systems of belief. And out of those, they found 6 sort of overarching virtues. They are wisdom and knowledge, courage, social intelligence, justice, temperance, and transcendence. I'll say those again. Wisdom and knowledge, courage, social intelligence, justice, temperance, and transcendence. From those 6, they elaborated 24 strengths, and they put those into an inventory you can also take online. But in this case, you don't have to buy a book. Even better, you can simply go to the website that is named for Dr. Martin Seligman's latest book, AuthenticHappiness.org. AuthenticHappiness.org. And what you're looking for is called the Values in Action, VIA, Signature Strengths Survey. VIA, Signature Strengths Survey. What I like about this one is that you can get not only your top 5, but all 24 in rank order, which allows you to look at where your preferences fall. And you can use some of your mid-range strengths more consistently when you know them. For some reason, the Gallup people will only give you your top 5, despite all the complaining about that. So I've actually used both of these inventories with individual clients and in organizations. And I find that it doesn't come easily at first. Sometimes people resist their strengths. They say, oh, I don't think I'm anything special in that area. How can that possibly be one of my strengths? Well, historically, we're not conditioned to think of the positive. We're ready to look at the weakness and prepare for it. We're anxious to save ourselves. And so we don't look at the positive and the strengths. But when we turn that around, we can see that amplifying those strengths allows us to build on and manage where we're having a tough time in particular ways. Let me just give you some examples. I mentioned that my top strength is strategic. Another of my strengths on the Gallup one is called input. That means I love to collect data. I have files of quotes and poems and things that I think might be useful someday. And when I'm preparing for something like this talk or a weekend workshop at Stanford, I find that I am overwhelmed with data. I can overuse those two strengths and it won't serve me well unless I remember that one of my other strengths is communication, and a fourth one is inclusiveness. I want to make sure people feel included. And I consistently get the feedback that I give people more than they need. Pare it down, make it simpler. You lost me, you know. When I get that feedback, I know I'm overusing the input strength. And in order to be strategic and more successful, I need to make sure I test out my ideas with others. And here's where strengths within teams become so important. On the Gallup inventory, there are two strengths that you'll often find in conflicts within teams. One of them is called activator. That person is ready to go out of the gate. The idea comes up, they've already thought about implementation. They've already chosen the people they want to work with. They're impatient with you for even asking why we should get levels of approval. That's the activator strength. Then there's the deliberative strength. It's also a strength, but it suggests that the best thing to do is to take your time, think it through clearly, get all of the data under your hands, and then come to a decision. You know these two people on a team are going to have judgments about one another. They're going to have stereotypes. They're going to say, oh, that person's always going off half-cocked. And, well, you know, this person's always just dragging us down. They delay everything we need to do. But when you understand how strengths play into a team, you see that just as in an individual, we can develop all the strengths that are there. Within a team, you can use that as well. And know that if you feel like you might be leaning too hard on one of your strengths, you can check it out with someone else who clearly has strengths in other areas. So, in addition to this basic information, I wanted to share with you today an additional research finding as a bunch of tools for you to take away. And that has to do with 5 key strengths that research shows are never fail ones for any of us. This comes from this second inventory, the Values in Action Significant Strengths Survey. The Seligman positive psychology work. After the initial round of research, a Korean psychologist, Dr. Nan-soon Park, got interested in whether there were certain key strengths that made people more satisfied and better performers. And unlike the Gallup research that never went into that, they did do this with a number of people who'd taken the online survey, well into the thousands, and now they're replicating the study. And they found 5 key strengths. I like to think that they represent all the domains of human learning. So I'll just go through them with you. And then towards the end, I'll give you a chance to ask questions or interact a bit. The first of these key strengths is zest. I think of it as the physical domain strength. Sometimes it's called vitality or enthusiasm. It's that reservoir of body-based energy that we all have when we're doing something we love, when we've had a good night's sleep, when we're excited about a project. This is one of the key strengths that anyone can use as an ally. And if you are finding that you're losing touch with that aspect of your being, nothing is more important than that you refill the well, because burnout lies the way of losing your zest. Zest is not correlated to health. It's correlated to how strongly you feel that you can have an impact on your world. So it's a physical presence and magnetism that we see in leaders who are physically very dominant and comfortable in their skins. But all of us can learn to work with that strength and to access it more. There is an important aspect to this that I think comes out in a book by two other coaches, Jim Lohr and Tony Schwartz. In their work, they've found that managing energy is more important than managing time. That if you learn to do things that will preserve your physical zest at the right time of day, and if you keep yourself energized throughout a day with what they call positive energy rituals, simple things like never sitting for more than an hour at a time, getting up and walking around, having a social interaction to break up times of pure concentration and focus, that your level of zest or physical well-being will stay high. So zest is the first of the 5 key strengths. The second is curiosity. It is that ongoing intrinsic interest, both in everything in the internal world, our thoughts, our feelings, our attitudes, our perceptions and sensations, as well as everything in the external world, near and far. Curiosity enlivens our life and inoculates us against boredom. When we are using the strength of curiosity, our minds are alive and alert. And I don't think I have to tell Googlers about that, because that's part of what brought you here. Your curiosity, your drive to know more and to leverage knowledge in particularly innovative and important ways. The foremost researcher in this area has the bone-crunching name of Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, a Hungarian psychologist who for the last almost 40 years has been researching a phenomenon he calls flow, or optimal experience. When we are in flow, it's as if time stands still. Our skills are equal to the task, and we just feel like we could do this forever. He says that the flow channel operates on either side of, on one side, anxiety. If you're too anxious, you can't get in flow. And on the other side, boredom. If you're not stimulated enough, you can't get in flow either. So he suggests that keeping our curiosity enlivened is a very important discipline for top performers, and that's why it's a key strength. We can enliven our curiosity by paying attention to anything. How many blue things can you see in this room right now? I said blue because I'm looking at a sea of mostly blue chairs, but maybe I should have said green. Csikszentmihalyi says nothing is interesting until we focus our attention on it. You can bring your attention to your commute, to a dilemma that has bedeviled you, if you simply shift your perspective and focus your attention in new ways. And in that way, you'll be using that mental key strength. The third key strength, zest, curiosity, is optimism. I think of it as the emotional domain of strengths leadership. And if that word rums through the wrong way, I don't mean Pollyanna. Optimistic people interpret their troubles as transient, as limited to just one situation, and as controllable. Pessimistic people think that their troubles are going to last forever, they're going to bleed into everything, and there's nothing you can do about it. And those two orientations are, to an extent, conditioned by our genetics and our family background, but they are also amenable to change. And nobody knows that better than Dr. Martin Seligman, who got this whole movement started. He says he's a dyed-in-the-will pessimist, and he takes his medicine of what he calls learned optimism very seriously. There is much written about how you might do that. The most recent book that I confess to not even having finished completely, because it only came out a couple weeks ago, but I would recommend it highly, is called The How of Happiness. It's by Sonia Lubomirsky, another name not easy to spell, but if you just look up the How of Happiness, she's a researcher from UC Riverside who has looked at all the positive psychology research and codified 12 strategies to help boost your level of functioning, your strengths-based functioning. One alone that I'll mention, because I think it ties in with optimism, is avoid overthinking and social comparisons. When you're in a highly driven, competitive environment, it's so possible to get into that loop where you're just overthinking everything and you're not able to break out of your own mental rut. You are comparing yourself to your intellectual peers, you're wondering if people are thinking you're losing your strength, and you are going into a pessimistic downward spiral if you stay there. But the people I coach, I suggest ways to avoid that. What Lubomirsky says in her book, a few strategies are to distract yourself as soon as you notice that you're overthinking, in whatever way works. She also suggests visualization could be helpful for people who are visual, to imagine a big red stop sign appearing right in front of you every time you start to overthink. And finally, one that's worked for a lot of people is to schedule your overthinking periods. You will overthink only from this 15-minute period in a day. If you do that, it's likely to help boost that key strength of optimism. On then to the last two. The fourth, after zest, curiosity, and optimism, is gratitude. And this is actually the most potent of the 5 key strengths. There is more research showing that gratitude is powerful than with any of the other strengths. And here the research is based on interventions where they have asked people to do different things. First, they researched what they called a gratitude visit, to go to someone that you have never properly thanked and tell them of your gratitude. Could be something small, could be life-changing, but the gratitude visit was one intervention. Another was a gratitude letter, which would allow you to write to someone, perhaps, who was no longer on this planet, but to whom you also had never expressed your gratitude fully. And the third intervention was to write in some kind of form, whether journal or just on a Post-it, every day, 3 things that you were grateful for. What came up immediately was that this last one, the writing 3 gratitudes, was the most powerful intervention. In fact, when people who identified as moderately to severely depressed on the inventory on their website did that intervention, they weren't on medication, they weren't in therapy, but they were moderately to severely depressed. They wrote 3 gratitudes a day for 2 weeks. They had all moved out of that range and into mildly depressed. That may not sound like much if you don't want to be depressed, but there's nothing that we can equal with psychotherapy and medication that overtakes that. So now they're refining it, and there are whole books on gratitude and how to work with it. The latest finding from Lubomirsky's book is that while it works well to write 3 a day, it can be even better to do that once or twice a week, to do it regularly but randomly rather than religiously every day. That seems to have a more positive effect. And they found with the initial study with 3 gratitudes, doing it daily, that compared with the control group, after 6 months, after doing it only for 2 weeks, those people were still 25% happier than the control group. They had begun adopting it naturally. So gratitude is a very potent key strength. And finally, the last of the 5, zest, curiosity, optimism, gratitude, and the ability to give and receive appreciation, caring, or if you want to use the word, love. This strength is important, I think, in the domain that is both social and in terms of the meaning and purpose framework for our lives. Most of us find that we may be able to give appreciation, but it's harder to receive it. Why else in the English language would we say, can't you take a compliment, as if it were cod liver oil? We find it difficult often to appreciate what's coming towards us and to accept it and be affirmed by it, but we need it desperately. In another book that's come out of the Gallup people, they looked at how much appreciation and caring is expressed in the American workplace. They found that the number one reason people leave their jobs is because they feel unappreciated at work. The number one reason. And then when they went further and surveyed tens of thousands of people, they found that 65% of the people they surveyed had received no recognition in the previous year at their work. None. Zero. 65%. No wonder that's the number one reason. So the ability to give and offer affirmation and receive affirmation, appreciation, caring, is so important as a key strength as well. It leads right into the package that you put together when you use these 5 strengths as your allies, plus those that you might naturally discover either on your own or through one of these inventories. Well, if all this sounds overwhelming, I think it's important to close by saying that the small step approach is best. You don't have to suddenly try and leverage all your strengths and bring them in. What we know from neuroscience is that change is overwhelming. So what I do in working with clients is have them begin to amplify their strengths and apply their strengths to their work and personal dilemmas in small increments. There's a wonderful book called One Small Step Can Change Your Life by a psychologist who works with the doctors at UCLA Medical Center. And Robert Moorer, who wrote One Small Step Can Change Your Life, takes the view that our neurological makeup is such that if we try to put too much change into the system at once, we will shut down. We will become terrified. There's this little aspect in the midbrain, this little organ called the amygdala, that pumps out all our fight or flight hormones. It's very needed if you're a zebra grazing and there's a lion nearby. Immediately, everything stops but running away. However, we're no longer zebras, and yet our amygdalas fire just walking into a difficult meeting or anticipating a tense exchange with a colleague, defending your idea in front of your team. All of that is the equivalent of the lion. And yet, what happens when the amygdala takes over is that only 10% of the information about the situation is what we act on. The other 90% goes to our neocortex for long-term analysis and storage. Great if you have time, not so good if you're on the spot. So to reduce our anxiety and make the changes as small as possible is what Moorer suggests. And it's what I would suggest to you in an approach to leveraging your strengths. Find something that is a little tiny tweak, whether it's writing 3 gratitudes or adopting some positive energy ritual, maybe taking one of the inventories and posting your 5 strengths so that you see it once a day. Review your day. When did you use one? Oh, what was that like? How might you have done it differently? That kind of curiosity will take you far. And it's important also to do all of this in balance and moderation. I find that one of the temptations as a coach is to encourage overmuch and to overpromise. We don't want to do that. We want to be realistic about how tough it is to sustain creativity and high performance. But I also don't want to underplay how possible the hope is and how small increments make a difference in what you do. In a minute, I'll open it up for questions or comments, if any of you have any. but I'd like to close with a little wisdom passage from Stephen Mitchell's translation of the ancient Chinese text, the Tao Te Ching, by Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu wrote, "Fill your bowl to the brim and it will spill. Keep sharpening your knife and it will blunt. Chase after money and security and your heart will never unclench. Care about people's approval and you will be their prisoner. Do your work, then step back, the only path to serenity." So, I wish you serenity and strengths-based leadership, and I thank you for being with us today and taking this time together. Does anyone have any questions or comments? You can either just ask it where you are or come to the mic. I sense considering, but I'm not hearing anything. So, yes?
You said that variables contribute 40% to total formula, and how the other 60 divides between set range and circumstance.
It's about equal. The question was, if 40% is the variables we can use to use our strengths and be happier, what accounts for the other 60%? It's about equal, 30% set range, 30% circumstances. So the actual biggest piece of the pie is what's under your own control if you look at each separately. Good question. Thank you. Yes?
Coming from a somewhat cynical background.
Of course.
You worked at a large company that was also trying to push this same kind of thing. In fact, they had Marcus Buckingham talk, etc. But it didn't seem to get beyond the HR people, really.
Aha.
And as an engineer, I always had the feeling that when I'm judged, I have to be able to do all the things that the management is able to do, but also all the technical things. Whereas they only have to be able to do the managerial things, but it's okay if they're not technical. And it's nice to talk about how, I mean, I'm leaving out Google here. I'm talking about one of more general sense.
Other places.
Other places. But it's nice to talk about working to your strengths, but the reality is that it's not just the attitude of people saying, oh, you've got to improve your things. That's the way the other people get themselves ahead.
So the question...
They get ahead by enforcing that view on things.
Yes. So the question or challenge I think I'm hearing is, so what do you do if the overall environment is still pointing to weakness and offering competitive challenges that require you to do everything as best as possible? I think that's daunting. And I don't undervalue the challenge that is. It's why I think this sort of thing works best when it's a comprehensive kind of approach. And part of what I think we're trying to do here at Google is work from the engineering organization to disseminate these ideas through coaching, through all the levels, and try and have this be something that is more embraced widely. I understand what you're saying. I've seen it. I also think that it doesn't always have to play out that way. And I would encourage you to get curious about where your point of power is as an individual in the situation and play around with that one. Thank you. Other questions or comments? Well, then, I'm just going to say thank you very much for the opportunity, and have a good day.